I guess I could take down the photo now since we're going to start talking now. But yeah, there's always something. It's Monday. Hello.
Yes. I feel like there's something about like just being a Monday and always having things just, be a little off, but that's okay.
That's part of the adventure of life, the flavor of life.
The flavor of life.
Yeah.
Well, good morning and welcome again to the latest episode of Project Failure Files. This is a series for anyone who manages people, projects, processes, herds cats, chases things, whatever it is that you do. If you do any of that stuff for a living, this is definitely the series for you. I am Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, the founder of Collab Talk. And welcome to another episode where we're always perfect, always. But our series where Sharon and I explore projects, topics, things that happen, leadership development from the perspective of what not to do. In each episode, we talk about some of the common pitfalls, share some personal stories and experiences, and I've got some good ones for this one, and explore strategies and best practices to help you to be successful.
And in this episode, we are going to talk about the problem that I'm sure many leaders find themselves in when they fail to address problems at the root, instead focusing on the small fires that come up when those are really just symptoms of maybe a bigger issue that needs to be addressed.
I just used this phrase yesterday, but I jokingly used the phrase, we can do hard things. Which is especially useful if you have teenagers or had teenagers who are complaining about doing their chores at home. And I would mockingly say, it's like, we can do hard things here. And they're like, roll the eyes at that response. But I have also used that. Sorry, what?
It's difficult.
It is. Life is hard, Sharon. So hard. It's like, I just did the dishes. Right. We make dirty dishes every day. Right. I just vacuumed my carpet. That was a week ago. And when they come out, it's like, didn't we just have your birthday last year? Are we doing it again this year?
You don't understand they're exhausted from all that laying around.
Right. There's a lot of TV, a lot of internet to look at, Sharon. It takes energy to stare at your small screens. But I found it useful in project meetings sometimes when faced with difficult decisions and people are like fighting, making that decision to do what's needed, not what's easier or popular, because that's some of the stories that I have, and I'm sure you have many as well. Where passing the buck, maybe sometimes we'll get into some of those.
Yeah. There are, there's definitely like healthy conflicts and some maybe not so healthy or unhealthy conflicts. We'll talk about some examples of both of those, maybe discuss some approaches and frameworks for conflict resolution.
And Sharon, I have a feeling I'm going to bring up that book again, Crucial Conversations, as I tend to do. I think I've done that in like a dozen of the episodes of the series.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great book. And if you haven't read it as part of your management or executive leadership training, then first of all, I will be shocked, surprised, and perplexed. And second of all, you should. And if you haven't read it in a while, maybe go back and read it yet again.
And it comes with the workbook, I think, too. But that series is fantastic. And a lot of trainers that have workshops, if you want to do something more in depth for your team, highly recommend it. It's good stuff. Should be a great conversation as always. And as with every episode, please feel free to comment throughout, share your experiences, any great examples or feedback that we may have missed. I know we get a lot of people that watch this on demand after the effect. We've got a Facebook group and kind of all these other things, but share your feedback. That would be great. And a great place to do that is out on the website. We've got our newsletter. Sign up for the newsletter. You can also, if you scroll down, it's a contact form. There's a box there. You can share your story, leave your comment. If we gloss over something that should have been more in depth and should be its own episode, which happens sometimes, you can let us know there as well. It's in the comments out on LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever you're finding through social media these episodes. It's all good.
Yeah, definitely. Just let us know. Okay, let's get started with some definitions.
Yeah, it's the I guess the difference between a healthy conflict, an unresolved or unhealthy or festering, as we were thinking of using an image of Uncle Fester in here. but in a project setting, like I've worked on projects. I worked for a company that, and we would often yell at each other because people were passionate, but it wasn't, I mean, it got heated as
Mm-hmm.
defending our positions, but it was all good. It was, I would call that healthy. It was an atmosphere where they really encourage people, like, speak your mind, be open. Let's get the different perspectives. And so the fact that everybody was comfortable enough, like we got to yelling back and forth and calling things stupid ideas, but then recognizing you're right. Okay, hey, I was wrong, and this was good, and this worked out, and then let's go to lunch. It was very comfortable. It was part of the culture. I look at that and I said that was healthy. There were some people that were very uncomfortable, but I mean that's not what we're really talking about here.
Yeah, I think as long as, healthy conflict versus not healthy or an unhealthy conflict, I think, like you said, and we talk a lot about a culture of trust. And I think when you have a culture of trust, you trust that you're going to express yourself in a way that first of all is authentic to you. And second of all, that if it does offend somebody or hurt somebody or cause problems, that they're going to feel that there's enough trust to let you know that so that you can handle it. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think in a healthy level of trust culture, when there is conflict, you're not afraid to bring it up. You're not afraid to deal with it. You're not afraid to apologize afterwards. You're not afraid to work through it, whatever it takes to get there. And I would almost say that unhealthy conflict is less about having conflict and more about either not having it or not dealing with it or ignoring it, because conflict is just part of the human existence. And it's part of the, we think about the forming, storming, norming, performing. Yeah. I constantly am telling my team, like, anytime there's an issue, I'm like, they're like, well, we don't want to deal with this. And I'm like, if there's no storming, then there's no norming or performing. And so you're keeping yourself from maturing into this really great team if you don't let yourself storm.
We talk a lot about, I mean, almost every episode we talk about the culture because it's the most important aspect of so much of what you do, of whether you're effective or not. And in this role, whether you're a project manager and an individual contributor low down the totem pole, or you're a leader, building something, doing this, you need to have those feedback mechanisms. You need to have some degree of transparency. There's a number of things which can lead to this avoidance problem, is that if your culture is on the toxic side of the scale, where people don't feel like they can voice their opinion because there'll be retribution or whatever it is. I mean, I love the, like,
look, pretty sure there's a law against that.
Right. Right. And yet it happens. I mean, this is the kind of thing which leads to like a bad manager not being fired because they might be, and we've talked about these examples in my past experiences with the managers that were really good at the day work, that side of it, but were horrible on the people side. And so nobody wanted to be in that team, in that organization. And the leadership wouldn't do anything about it because they were happy with that piece of it. But overall, long term, the damage was serious to that organization. And so that's why, like, when you see these things, and the transparency part of it, when you see it and speak up about it, you also need to be able to have visibility into, okay, what's being done about this? It's been discussed by the leadership team. We've decided not to do anything, and here's why. That is dealing with the conflict. But instead of the not discussing it, not dealing with it, not making any change, addressing that, and then the repercussions are that people then say, I'm out of here. People want to quit. They want to leave. They don't share themselves, their thoughts. So your project suffers because it doesn't have all of the ideas. I'm only going to bring forth those safe ideas where I know there will be low to no conflict.
Yeah. Well, and this stems with everything we do. It's all the choices that lead up to that and all of the ways that they deal with things that people watch. And then they're just like, well, I saw how you handled that, and that's going to make me think that maybe I can't say something, or maybe I can't, have an opinion here. And I think what ends up happening is you get new people that watch how the other people. So to your point, you had a culture of, people feeling like they could say those things. And I think what happens, you get a new person in and they watch and they go, okay, well, how does everybody else deal with conflicts? And they tend to model that behavior. And what ends up happening is you kind of get this cycle of, maybe really good conflict management or maybe really bad conflict management. But, I think one of the things that I've seen overall is whatever that tone is, a lot of times doesn't really ever change for a really long time. It just kind of is what it is.
Well, what it also does is it attracts the, the idea of like the yes man. So it's the sycophant who just whatever that bad manager, bad leader wants to do and gravitates, which then compounds the problem, because then they again mirror the same practices, the same bad habits.
I was just thinking, so one of the big things for me I think about is the whole adage of everything you want is on the other side of fear. I really truly believe that, right? Whatever you're afraid of, whatever you want is probably right on the other side of it. I was thinking we need a meme that says everything you want is on the other side of conflict.
Yeah. Which is true. It's like, well, peace through conflict, that side of it. Well, there's I guess that's another way to approach it too, is that, because I do, when you think of that, like politically, nationally, of like the peace through strength idea, in some respects, that kind of applies here. Like as an executive, the leadership team, needs to buy into this concept at the top of the culture totem pole. And part of that is like the peace through strength is that when you allow people to voice their opinions and have diametrically opposed opinions and share that, be vocal and raise issues and concerns, but then you address it. It's part of your structure, your methodology there, the culture, all of those words is part of that. Then people will be more open, more sharing. You're going to more quickly identify problems, long-term issues, find risks. To identify risks in a passive-aggressive, nobody bringing stuff forth organization, it's rough.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that in the past in other episodes where, one of the biggest risks is when people don't bring up risks.
Right.
And I think this is kind of that same conversation, is that, if you have conflicts that are happening, and conflict can be so many different things, right? It's just something where something's not working the way that it should be. When you let that fester and you don't solve it, like it's exactly the same thing. If you're not getting feedback, if you're not getting input, if you're not getting updates, then, at the end of the day, are you really moving forward with your project, or are you just simply, we joke about note takers and spreadsheet masters and things like that, right? Like if you're just a PM and you're just writing things down, are you really a PM?
Right. I've also had as a manager running a PMO, and where I had two PMs that were not getting along, and there was like their projects had some overlap, and they weren't resolving it. They were competing. And I sat them both down, and like I had a personal opinion. I was of one versus the other. I kind of sided more with one, but I said, hey, you know what? This is impacting a lot of things. And to be perfectly honest, you guys don't figure it out, you could both be gone from this. Like, we can't have this. It's unhealthy. It's causing other problems. Like, you work it out. And so having that, that was something that I went and did. Again, this goes to what we're talking about, is like not letting these things fester. Because unresolved tension, it undermines collaboration, trust, the psychological safety, decision-making. A lot of HR gets involved. Nobody wants that. All these kinds of things that can happen because of this, where it's a tiff that there's overlap and there's a disagreement on whatever it is, disagreement on approach, and personal methodology on those things. Like, the two of you need to work this out. This is what I did. Work it out. Or there will be consequences for both of you for not working this out. And one was trying harder than the other, but the mediation, like that, forcing them to discuss that out, helped resolve that. I still don't think they liked each other after that, but it was a working relationship. They were able to get past that. It's like you don't need to invite these people back to your home for dinner, but you do need to get along in the workplace. And
yeah.
call those things out.
And I think when you avoid or ignore some of those smaller things, they tend to kind of grow, right? And so, or they get shifted around. I have a fantastic story, and I'm going to remove as many details from this as possible so that nobody knows what I'm talking about. But I do want to share it because it's very, very valuable to the lesson of what we're talking about. I once had somebody I know who worked at a business that shall not be mentioned, and they realized that their cube mate was essentially watching inappropriate material out loud in the cube next to them. And
it's sad that I've had that experience as well. So yes,
it's just sad that it even exists, but this happened. And so said person that I know messaged me and said, oh my gosh, what do I do? Because I don't want to raise this red flag and end up losing my job or getting in trouble, because the person that was doing this was somebody who'd been there for a very long time, had a lot of knowledge, was well respected by the department and the group. And I mean, basically, my friend was just like, yeah, I mean, I can't imagine anything happening, but like, I feel like I need to do something. And I said, you need to report it. You need to report it to HR. And then we'll see what comes of it. And if it's satisfactory to you, then great. And if not, then this might be a decision that you're going to have to make personally of whether you can keep this job or stay with this team or whatever. And so they did report it to HR. HR came in and validated the allegations, let's put it that way, and verified everything. And what was really frustrating is that ultimately they told the person to stop and they moved the cube to a different location. And that was all that happened. That was it. That was like the extent of what happened. And what this taught my friend was that essentially, that integrity was not part of the conversation, that it was more about, the people who are providing the value, that they can kind of get away with whatever they want. And it doesn't matter. And ultimately, my friend did not stay with that organization for a long time, as you can well imagine. But it speaks to this idea of there are little conflicts that happen all the time. And there's these little things that happen, and how an organization deals with those small fires then defines the larger political and cultural landscape for eternity within that organization. And so it's very, very important. It's not about if two people aren't getting along. That's not what we're talking about. That's not the only issue. The issue is there a conflict within the team that is happening in any way, shape, or form? And how are you handling that?
It's more of like the systemic issues, the culture issues. I mean, look, twice in my career, I have resigned because of they were unwilling to, so they were conflict avoidance around the issue. But it was the culture was very much conflict averse, very political, highly political. And so I called out ethical behavior. One time I was a part of the leadership team, and I'm just like, I will not work in an organization. Like, you did nothing. The CEO actually laughed at the issue. And so I'm like, you lost some customers. Like, you're putting up with this. I'm done. And so I resigned there and then, and wrapped things up, gave the proper 2 weeks notice, but I was done. And so that's the kind of thing that can happen again. And then it attracts people that like the political side of it, it's more about manipulation and avoiding things and kissing up the chain, being really good at managing up. And then it just creates this systemic, unhealthy, toxic culture. I mean, there's other things about, again, repeating it, solving problems at the symptom level. So again, you may be more junior, might be a project manager. But if you're not addressing the underlying causes, it's just like, in any project with planning, if you don't solve it early, the longer that you let it go, the more expensive, the more time it will take, the more people it will impact, the more damage is done later. I mean, think about it. It's a great parallel with, like, in cybersecurity. If you get hacked, if it's like early on, like I got something hacked on my system. I was the only user on this demo system. There was no data. And so I just went in, killed that profile, relaunched like it's nothing. It was it was half a day, it was an inconvenience kind of thing. But if you don't go and resolve the issues that allow the people to go in and hack, like I know exactly what happened where I turned off multi-factor authentication so that I could do an install, was testing something else and forgot to turn it on. And so dumb, but nothing happened from that. In an organization, that can be, again, a parallel. If you do nothing about that, don't solve the problems. How do they hack in and do that? You are just wide open to problems later, and it gets more and more expensive around that.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, so we've talked about shadow IT, and I'm sure we'll talk about shadow IT again. But always. Yeah. But what happens, right? What happens when you don't solve a problem is exactly what you just said. People make workarounds. And so this is exactly the same topic. If you don't solve a technology problem, if you don't solve a process problem, if you don't solve a product problem, people will create a workaround to get around the problem. This is no different. This is a cultural problem. It's a interrelational problem. It's a communication problem. Whatever it is that's coming up, if you do not identify it, solve it, and put a fix in place for it, then your team will, but they will do it in the way that makes sense for them. And sometimes workarounds aren't so bad because they're good people. They're just trying to come up with a way to make it work. But oftentimes the workarounds can turn into, like you mentioned, political, gossipy, power, influence in the wrong way. Like what ends up happening is it creates and shifts the dynamics in the power of the group in a way that makes it so that culture shifts from being functional or positive culture to a dysfunctional or a more negative culture.
One of the issues too with a lot of this, is if where I say it's systemic. I mean, it really starts at the top on this issue. I mean, there's only so much that you can do further down in the body of the organization. But leaders that dismiss or redirect or avoid that conflict, they know that they have a bad manager, is my earlier example, but they don't do anything about it to fix that, and then can't understand why people keep leaving over in this organization. Maybe they're not looking at those metrics. Like that all will catch up with them. I mean, it's one of the things that attracted me towards the startup community and working in like venture capital backed. Again, there's accountability around all of those things with outside advisors and investors looking in saying, this problem, you're losing people. You can't hang on to your brain trust. What's going on? You need to solve this. They have that motivation behind them. They don't have that, and the leader's not bought into that. Then you have all of these problems. It ends up, you've got a subculture where sometimes you don't see it until like as a new person, an outsider comes in and it looks like, why are we doing this? Well, that's because we have to tiptoe around this executive in that organization because of these problems. It's like, that's stupid. That's taking us twice as long. It costs more and do that. And those people that were outsiders or newbies don't last long in that. And the rest of the people are, again, you might be in this kind of organization, so I'm sorry if I hurt some feelings out there, but the people that are whipped, that are just like, hey, it's just a job, I just put up with it, I get my paycheck, and that it's always sad to hear that when people lose their passion, their excitement for their work, and just because of this kind of, again, cultural damage that's done.
Yeah. It's a really, really good sign. I mean, when exactly that, if you get into an organization and, you can't bring up things because somebody's going to yell at you or you're afraid for retaliation, which once again, there's a law for that. So if for whatever reason you do something and they fire you because of it, that is illegal and they cannot do that.
Yeah.
But if you feel like you get into that organization and it's like that, it's a really good, quick and easy way to know that, there's dysfunction happening and maybe it's not the right place to be and it's a big red flag initially.
Well, so Sharon, don't take this wrong way, but this has been super depressing. Let's talk about positive strategies for overcoming the issue. And I don't know, has there been anything, have you employed any specific techniques? Like I talked about the mediation, having that as that route. Any other techniques you've tried?
I've gone into several places where I've done this over the years, and people will bring me in because I speak my mind. And I'm not afraid to.
I tell people, be careful. You ask my opinion, I'm going to tell you.
And I've done multiple different things. I've also raised like 475 children, so that I definitely use that in, my knowledge and my experience. And one of the things that I really like to do is much like the mediation, I really like team building. So, and people laugh at team building events. A lot of people, oh no, they poo-poo team building events. And why does HR always have a team building event every 5 minutes, right? And honestly, the truth of the answer is an organization that has a ton of team building events, in my opinion, regardless of what you think about them, is at least trying. Because the more that people get to know each other, the more that people trust each other, the more that people can communicate effectively and work together, the better. And so one of my biggest strategies is if I come into a place and people, there's unresolved tension of some sort, often you don't know what it is, you just know it's there. I will literally call a meeting, and I'll bring everybody in and maybe say, hey, let's get together and let's whiteboard, some of the things that are bothering you. And sometimes this will take a couple of rounds because people are like, they sit back like this. I don't really want to say anything. I don't want to be the first person to put my hand up, And so, sometimes I'll seed that conversation, but the key is really just getting them in the room and getting them to talk about, well, I have this issue or I have this issue. And often it's like not even big deals. It's just stuff that people didn't know about. Sometimes I'll take individuals like out to lunch, and say, hey, I just want to know what's going on, and is there anything I can assist with? And, we'll get to know each other a little bit professionally, just sitting there chatting and getting information, and with the intent that then we can take that information into that next group meeting and say, okay, I want to advocate, because at the end of the day, sometimes people are afraid to bring things up. And so if you have somebody there to advocate for the, identify the issues and try to deal with them, sometimes that helps people to voice the things that they're having problems with. I would say the third strategy that I use is workshops. And workshops are that idea of, I don't know if you did this in college, if you ever did the active listening workshop where you have to sit together, and this is that crucial conversation workshop type thing, right? You sit together and you're like, okay, I'm going to say this, and then you're going to say it back to me. I love doing workshops where I'm forcing people to work together in some way, especially in a capacity they're not used to, because it kind of forces them to get to know each other a little bit and work through some of those issues.
Yeah. Well, that's as we often talk about with the personality training and like the kind of structured workshops that some of these outside organizations do. That's like the psychology based, the Myers-Briggs based, that goes in and looks at, because a lot of when you look at what's the root cause of some of the conflicts there, besides somebody did something that they should have and shouldn't have, and there's kind of bad intent in there. Usually it's good intent. It's just different styles, different personalities that are come in conflict and don't know how to communicate with each other. And so if you can bring out outside experts and do that, it's one of the reasons why, like, I love the workshops. One of them that I love doing is, as a team, it's incredibly powerful, are these personality based, to understand more of your style, your working style, your personal style. And then the most important part of it, so everybody does that individually, then it's as a team, here the people that you work with, the primary folks out there, even identify, it's part of the workshop, people that you have conflicts with, to better understand why. And when you go look at the profiles and say, well, how does your personality profile best get along with my personality profile, and work out those deals, like, hey, there some change can come out of that. But that assumes that both sides are willing to, interested in. There's only so much that you can do to threaten, cajole people into mediation, into participating in one of those things. But again, that should be something, if that's part of your culture, like, look, we're going to go and get these things resolved and do it on a regular basis. Maybe it's once a year you're doing this, each team, these business units are doing that. I mean, I know that's a cost of time and expense of the outside resources, but if you're shaping your culture and there are unhealthy aspects of that, to go through and, essentially audit, what are we doing today? What's not working? Right. There are outside experts that can come in and facilitate that to help you develop those healthy habits and to have checkpoints. Like if you actually went to a vendor that's doing like the crucial conversations and doing that as an organization, like they come back and do follow-ups as part of that. So you score that, you say, here's what's going to change, report back on that. There's accountability to leadership on we're going to make the change so that we can resolve these kinds of things. So, I mean, having that neutral facilitation, whether you're doing it or whether you ask for that help, because that's another thing. If this is like you're a project manager, I'm having problems with Sharon, who's a project manager, but we both say like, this is not working, we're struggling. If you get one or both that say, we need outside help for this, that's actually a very healthy sign of like, hey, that we can go and do this and fix this. We know what we know, and we know that there are things that we don't know. We need outside help. There's nothing wrong with that. As a manager, I would rather have people come forward and say, we need help with this. We need you to take this action. That's why, again, in my weekly status template, my preferred model, the 4 blocker has like, you ask your manager, what do you need with? Sometimes in that quadrant on the presentation for this project is, I'm having difficulty with this division, this person, this leader, here, I need you to step in and help with this in this way. You have to be very specific. And if your leader then doesn't take any action or tries to Band-Aid over and doesn't fix it, then hey, this is systemic, and you've got a decision then to make. Like, do I stick around or not?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I really do. I think, we talk about culture and everything, all these shows that we do, every episode. And I think this really comes down to this idea of reminding people that we are people. We do have relationships. We do need to get to know each other, at least at a level of trust, right? And to be able to trust people, there's one thing to saying there are people who exist in my world that as long as they don't hurt me, it's okay. But when you work with people day to day, it's almost like they level up at least one level to where you do have to get to know them. You have to get to know them enough. You have to get to know them enough that, you know how they tick and they know how you tick. But more importantly, you also both need to have the skill set to be able to communicate effectively in a way that's going to make sense. And I was sitting here laughing because I was thinking we need like corporate therapy sessions.
Yeah, well, and some do, but it's funny. I mean, I actually remember was it 5th grade? For a while there, I was in like advanced math classes and stuff. So 5th grade, 6th grade, but just learning the whole concept of the common denominator. Mm-hmm. And how that like translates. So I use that phrasing all the time, like find that common denominator for, okay, we both agree. If it's nothing more than, hey, okay, we're both humans, we both breathe in and out, like kind of those things, and start from there. But you could find that like, let's go back. Common denominator should be like, here's our project management methodology. Here's the areas where I'm stuck, where I'm having conflict. You can go have this with a partner, with a customer, with people in your organization. And if you take that, like, let's step back, let's take a look at the structured approach. Again, there might be a methodology. There's like the 5 whys, there's the situation, target, proposal methodology. There's a lot of tools out there. But if you go back and start there and fill it in, like if they won't even entertain that discussion, again, there's an answer. Like, they are not willing to go and solve that. In the work situation, most people are like, they might roll their eyes and be like, like, let's look at it through a structured, let's resolve this. Let's structure, helps me understand, helps you understand. And then we understand each other's perspectives of how we might move this forward. You bring something like that forward, and most people will be like, okay, all right. I understand, like, yes, let's go and do this. Fill out the form, follow the process, look at this, bring in the mediator to have the discussion there.
And I think one thing too, and I think you said it somewhere and I heard it, and here's the nugget I want to add. Always, 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 you praise what you want to keep and you ignore what you don't want to keep, right? We want to praise good behaviors. We want to ignore bad behaviors. And I think sometimes because we're all grown adults and we forget about the kind of like parenting part of this. But I think as a manager, as a leader, if you want your culture to be a performing culture where people do feel comfortable to bring up conflict or communicate or whatever, one of the things that I really like to do is to praise and reward people for bringing up things that need to be dealt with. And this is where it gets really, gray area, because what I'm not saying is I'm not saying that we want to create a culture of firefighters and superheroes that set things on fire to just put them out so that they get a reward for that. What I am saying is encouraging people to feel like they can speak up, encouraging people to feel like they can deal with conflict, encouraging people to feel like they can work through some of these things, and then rewarding them for understanding that it is an issue and identifying it and working through it and things like that, as opposed to just being like, okay, let's shove this conflict over here under the rug and not tell everybody that's going on. How can we do it in a way that we can learn from this conflict and we can grow from this conflict and we can use it to better our people, our organization, in a way that, makes sense? We need to reward those activities. And we need to ignore the activities where people are either hiding things under the rug or setting things on fire just so that they can get attention for it.
Well, and when you talk about reward too, I mean, to clarify, if you're a manager, if you're an executive within the company and you can actually formalize that activity, that's great. What can I do if I'm low on the totem pole? I'm a project manager doing that. The first thing you do is specifically call out, recognize them, even if it's one-on-one with them. Hey, really appreciate the fact that had this issue, you did this, which was kind of above and beyond, or it might not be. It might be like, well, technically it should. It's your job to figure this out. But call that out, recognize it. Like, hey, I really appreciate this. This was a source of tension, have this conflict, and we've got it resolved. So thank you very much for that. If that's all you do, I'm telling you, you want to develop healthy relationships, even with people that you don't like, they don't like you. But when you can recognize, hey, this helped and do this, and call it out in that discussion, even stop by their office or their cube and it's like, hey, I just wanted to call this out, but really appreciate that you went and you solved this. I know that was hard. I'm glad because it's causing a lot of problems in this project XYZ. So just wanted to say thank you. That's it. Don't add anything onto it. Let it stand there. That can be incredibly powerful, especially softening up people that are very rough around the edges and are constant conflict creators. But I mean, if you can normalize things, make kind of getting into best practices here, that healthy conflict, what does that look like? People bringing up difficult topics and be like, we need to resolve it. We need to do this and take action around those things. And then make that part of your team culture. So, I mean, jumping into call to action too, is that, again, if it's, find out what is limiting you, what do you want to see happen? What do you think will get to solve this? What are those hard things? And then go to the people that would own those, whether it's yourself or to your manager or to the project manager, the executive, the person in the other organization, and say, look, this is my number one risk here to my project, to the timeline, to the budget, is this conflict is causing this. I believe this is the path. Is this something we can work on together? Is this acceptable? But it's, again, it goes back to that phrase. We can do hard things. Sometimes, I get to use one of my favorite words, Sharon. You need to be clinical in your approach. Rip the Band-Aid off. You're the doctor. Sharon, you have cancer. You have to have that conversation. You need to be frank up front with people, but do it in a way is now here's how I propose we move forward. Here's my action plan for this. You need to create a culture where people are willing to do exactly that.
And it can't be subjective. Just like you just said, it has to be clinical and it has to be based on a governance level decision that's already been pre-made around, we talk about other risk tolerances, like how far do we get before we say that the budget is risk? How far do we get before we say the schedule is a risk? For every single thing, you have to have a tolerance level. This is no different. If you've got conflicts within your team, what defines something that becomes a risk? I think, you have to have that kind of predefined as what do we accept and what do we not accept, so that we know if it falls into this territory, it goes on the risk sheet, as opposed to this one little thing that's happening over here. We're not going to call that a risk quite yet. Maybe we mark it as yellow and keep an eye on it, but it's not quite in the red zone yet.
Right.
I think if you already have governance around these things, you've already defined what that risk tolerance is, it makes things a lot easier to be able to identify them later.
Right. Well, the other things too, two other things, just to wrap up, is document. You need to have CYA around issues, especially in the thick of it. We talked about that in a previous, not too long ago episode. CYA, cover your assets. The other thing is that this again speaks to how important the documenting this is in the postmortem at the end of the project, to go back and review. Here's what worked well. Here are the ugly things that we resolved or didn't resolve, and why there's going to be future impact because we didn't address these things. You have to, again, have that level of trust, be brave to say, here are these things where we failed and didn't fix. And if that's held against you, there are laws. But if that's something where you feel like you're being identified to somebody that's not going along with the flow, or for whatever those things are, you're experiencing that festering conflict, then it's something that, maybe it's an HR discussion. Maybe it's just that you document that. Maybe there's an indication that long-term that place, that job is not for you, but at least then you have the data to make a decision, around that. So
Yep.
Call to action very quickly. Sharon, what one thing that you'd say that people can go and do to practice these skills?
My answer for this is always, know yourself. Understand your own boundaries. Take an active listening class, take a conflict resolution class, read Crucial Conversations, take a workshop, do a personality test, because at the end of the day, you should understand if you are feeling conflict or you're participating in conflict, you need to know yourself well enough to understand what is okay and what isn't, and how can you properly respond to it, so that everything else, needs to be happening at an organizational level. But for you personally, own your own part of it. Yeah.
Look, and I know we're not going to dive into it, but we actually didn't talk about this side of it because maybe it is just you. Maybe nobody else is experiencing the conflict of that because you're still adjusting to it. So again, by knowing your style, knowing how you fit in, that could be part of that too. But again, I'd say my one call to action is, go and everything that Sharon just said. And, it sounds just really, I'm dismissing it. It was read a book. You should read a book. No, that's what I was saying. But to go and find one or two frameworks and try those out. If you find one that works to help you get through this in a structured way, then make it part of you, your system. People then will adjust to it. That's a great way to start making change to the culture. And one person can start to change that culture. One person is part of the culture. You're in there. So if you just start saying, I always use this framework for conflict, hey, what happens is when they're dealing with you, those people will become familiar with the framework. They'll gain trust in the framework. They'll understand it. And then they'll be a more and more willing participant of that. It just becomes okay, I'm interacting with Sharon. We're always using this framework here. So a structured approach is a great way to help develop a less developed or a problematic culture around
immature. We're going to go with immature.
Immature. There we go. That's a great word for it. So. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for participating, for watching, and maybe it's on demand. A lot of our audience are not live, they're on demand. So really appreciate these as we continue to grow. Please be sure to follow us and subscribe. Recordings, of course, and I've not been sharing any of the banners, and I should out there, but you can follow. Sharon and I are kind of all over the interwebs out there. You can find us easily. If you're not watching through YouTube, or if you've not yet seen us over there, go and subscribe to it. follow the playlist. You could look at all of our previous episodes. Lots more content and training and community tools coming later in 2025. And then, as I shared earlier, please go to projectfailurefiles.com, sign up for the newsletter, leave us some feedback. We'd love to hear from people. And yeah, it's always lots of fun. So Sharon, thanks a lot. As always, we'll see everybody next Monday, every Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific. We'll see you there.
Bye. It did look good on paper, but now we know that's not how it went.